Hello. Okay, if you haven't watched part one, please go watch that right now. I don't really know what to say here. Yeah, go watch that if you haven't already, so you can actually understand this. Yeah, enjoy. You're in the black void-like area again. Eliza looked at you and shook her head. She sighed and crossed her arms. You're kinda like an adult version of me. Only you're not afraid of everything that moves. She mumbled that last part and crossed her arms, looking away. What do you mean? You asked. She sighed again. Mercy. I tried everything I could to change them. I was even friends with Papyrus and Flowey. She said. You pondered. Who's Flowey? You asked. Eliza turned her head in surprise. You didn't see Flowey when you fell? She gasped. You slowly shook your head. No, was I supposed to? You asked. Eliza stood shocked, then closed her eyes and took a breath. Never mind. I guess he just didn't feel like greeting the next human. You turned to the gold glowing buttons. Just like before, they would continue and reset. You sighed and pressed continue. You opened your eyes. You were back at your last save point by Santa's Sentry Station, but he was nowhere to be seen. You were skeptical, but you shrugged it off and continued on the same path as last time. Only when you were supposed to encounter the greater dog monster, there was only a pile of dust and some pieces of metal that were probably pieces of broken armor. You stared and remembered a bit of what Frisk told you before. When monsters die, they turn to dust. You gasped audibly, and you heard footsteps behind you. Then you heard a familiar voice.
Hey Ryan, what'd you find?
You shivered. His voice sounded lower. You blushed slightly. Nothing, you mumbled. Sans looked at the blood and dust in the snow.
Yeah, that happens all the time. Don't worry about it too much.
He trailed off. Then I noticed your next new scar. It was shaped like a hole in your skull, with streaks running down your face, kind of like cracks.
Oh, that's there now.
He said. You shrugged. Yeah, apparently that happens every time I die. You said. He sighed and grabbed your hand.
Come on, we're going to my house.
It'd been 3 weeks since the Skella brothers let you live with them, although you kinda had to sleep with one eye opened. You didn't fully trust Sans, although one weird thing that happened was that when a monster killed you, when you came back, that monster was dead. It was confusing. You were sitting on the couch, and suddenly Sans sat next to you. You did your best not to move away. Yeah, you could talk to him and stuff, but you were still terrified of him. He suddenly leaned slightly closer, but not too obvious. You shuddered, chills running up your spine. You weren't really sure why, but you actually kinda like him being near you. You stood up and grabbed one of Sans's old jackets that he let you use, and you put on a mask and went outside. There were a few times a monster approached you picking a fight, or if it was a monster child, they asked if you had food. You are at Sans's Sentry Station, 'cause, well, you got bored. Sans suddenly teleported next to you.
Hey there.
He said. You shivered. Hi, you said, zipping up the jacket and hugging yourself slightly. It was cold, as usual, but for some reason today it just felt colder. Sans turned to you and sighed, but didn't say anything. He just stared at your eyes. The only part of your face you could really see, given you were wearing a mask that covered your nose and mouth. The mask resembled a skeleton. He sighed again, brushing a strand of hair behind your ear. The sudden movement made you blush. You were so glad you were wearing a mask right now. Sans still stared, but didn't remove his hand from your face. Suddenly, he removed the strap on the mask that was holding it up to the right side of your face. Your blush increased. What is he doing? He smirked, seeing your blush. He leaned in, and his warm teeth were pressed gently against your lips. You froze and blushed. Why? Why? You had many questions running through your head. He suddenly placed his hand behind your head and pulled you close. You slowly closed your eyes and tilted your head to the side. He licked your lips, and you parted them slightly, but before you could continue, a loud voice rang out. Sans! Have you seen the human? Papyrus said. Sans let go of you, and you fell into the snow. He held up a finger to his teeth, implying that you should pretend it didn't happen. You nodded and put your mask on. Papyrus came over. Oh! Hello, human! You stood up, brushing some snow off. Hey, Pap, you said, waving slightly, looking up at him. Almost all the monsters in the underground were turned to dust. There was rumors that there was a murderer. Most monsters were afraid. Some were happy about it, which was honestly very concerning. But the weird thing was, all the monsters that died hurt you in some way, shape, or form. Let it be physically or mentally. You were standing in a waterfall facing a monster. Washu was his name. He hit you with giant water drops. Eventually you couldn't dodge anymore. You were too exhausted. One more water drop hit you, and you died again. Eliza looked at you and sighed. That's it. I'm gonna follow you around when you get back. She said. You tilted your head. How? You asked. She smiled slightly. How else? I'm dead, which makes me a ghost. Plus, I'm not gonna be around you 24/7, she said. You stared at the buttons. You reached for the continue, then hesitated. If I hit reset, then it'll be like when I first came to Underground. Sans will probably remember me and all the dead monsters will come back, right? You sighed and pressed the reset button, and everything faded to white. You were back at the beginning of the ruins. You looked around. It looked exactly the same as it had when you first fell. You saw Eliza standing next to you. She was transparent. She looked around. You walked along the path. Eliza followed you. You were back in snow. Everything was the same. And Sans was at his sentry station. He opened his eye socket and seemed slightly disappointed.
Why'd you do it?
He asked. You sighed. Last time when I died, I thought about all the monsters that had died, and you sighed. I know I probably shouldn't have, looking back on it, but if you're upset about it, I won't blame you. He said. Sans lifted his head off his hand. His red eyes seemed to have literal flames coming off of it, and his hand glowed.
So you won't blame me if I do this?
You saved mere moments before he used his magic, and summoned sharp bones that came out of the ground, impaling you. But your death was near instant. You died two times afterwards, and he stopped himself with much difficulty as you'd saved him a second before the bones burst out of the ground. Sans seemed confused and eyed you.
Why'd you save at that moment? I only meant to do that once.
You stared at the ground. Sans teleported in front of you. Your eyes were blank for a second. Then you blinked and stared at him. You just shrugged and tried to walk around him, but he grabbed your arm firmly. But he tried not to hurt you with his claws. You turned towards him. Sans, what? He yanked you towards him. You felt his teeth being pressed against your lips. And he had his arms around your waist. You blushed. Sans moved his right hand behind your head and forced his tongue into your mouth. You closed your eyes, trying to contain a moan. Feeling his tongue move against yours, you finally gave up trying, and you moaned. He paused, opened his mouth slightly, and pulled away. You panted, and he blushed. Slightly. He looked away and let go of you. This time, you didn't fall. Okay.